The dust swirled around Ezra Blackwood's boots as he stepped off the train in Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1882. In his weathered hand, he clutched a telegram that had changed everything. Bride available. Good stock. $500. Wire confirmation. What kind of man buys a wife like cattle? The kind who'd spent 10 years building a ranch with nothing but his calloused hands and stubborn will, only to realize that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. The matrimonial agency's office sat between a saloon and a barber shop, its painted sign already peeling in the desert heat. Inside, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his ledger. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume?" "Excellent timing. Miss Evangeline Hartwell arrived yesterday." Ezra's throat went dry. He'd seen her photograph, auburn hair, defiant green eyes, and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled. The agency had been vague about her circumstances, mentioning only that she was educated but in reduced circumstances. "She's agreeable to this arrangement?" The agent's laugh was uncomfortable. "Well, sir, let's say she understands the necessity of it." When Evangeline entered the room, Ezra's breath caught. The photograph hadn't captured the fire in her eyes or the way she held herself like a queen facing execution. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, but she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice crisp with a Boston accent, "I assume you're here to inspect your purchase." The words hit him like a slap. "Miss Hartwell, let's dispense with pleasantries, shall we?" She lifted her chin. "You've paid for a wife, and I need the security of marriage. It's a business transaction, nothing more." Ezra studied her face, searching for any crack in her composure. "And what if I want more than a business arrangement?" Her laugh was bitter as desert wind. "Then you've made a poor investment, Mr. Blackwood. You bought a bride, not a heart." The ceremony was performed by a circuit judge who reeked of whiskey and asked no questions. Evangeline spoke her vows like she was reading a grocery list, while Ezra found himself meaning every word despite the circumstances. As they walked to his wagon afterward, he noticed how she flinched when he offered his arm, how she kept her distance like he might bite. "My ranch is a day's ride north," he said, helping her into the wagon. "It's not much, but it's honest work." "I'm sure it's adequate," she replied, staring straight ahead. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Finally, Ezra couldn't stand it anymore. "Look, I know this isn't what either of us dreamed of, but maybe we could try to be friends?" Evangeline turned to him, and for a moment, he saw something vulnerable flicker in her eyes before the walls slammed back up. "Friendship requires trust, Mr. Blackwood. And trust is a luxury I can no longer afford." As they rode into the gathering dusk, Ezra wondered what had happened to this woman to make her so afraid of kindness. He had no idea that the answer would destroy everything he thought he knew about honor, family, and the price of survival in an unforgiving world. 3 weeks into their marriage, Ezra had learned to read Evangeline's silences like weather patterns. There was the brittle quiet when she cooked breakfast, moving around his kitchen like a ghost afraid to disturb the living. The sharp silence when he tried to make conversation over dinner. And the hollow quiet that filled their bedroom each night as she lay rigid on her side of the bed, a canyon of space between them. His ranch hands, old Miguel and young Tommy, watched the strange dance between the newlyweds with barely concealed curiosity. Miguel, who'd known Ezra since he was green as spring grass, finally cornered him by the barn. "Patron, that woman, she jumps like a spooked horse every time you move too fast." Ezra paused in his fence mending. "She's adjusting, Miguel. This arrangement isn't easy for either of us. See, but adjusting and being afraid they are different things, no?" That evening, Ezra found Evangeline in the garden she'd started behind the house, her hands dirty with soil, her face peaceful for once. She'd planted herbs and vegetables with the precision of someone who understood the value of self-sufficiency. "You have a gift with growing things," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't look up from the tomato seedlings. "My mother taught me. She said a woman should never depend entirely on others for survival." It was the first time she'd mentioned her family. Ezra sat on the porch steps, keeping his distance. "Sounds like a wise woman." Evangeline's hand stilled. She was. Until my father's gambling debts killed her. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ezra waited, sensing there was more. He lost everything, she continued, her voice flat. The house, the business, even my mother's jewelry. When the creditors came, she worked herself to death trying to pay them back. Died of pneumonia in a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and broken dreams. I'm sorry, Ezra said, meaning it. Don't be. It taught me that depending on a man's promises is a fool's game. She finally looked at him, her green eyes hard as jade. At least with our arrangement, I know exactly what I'm worth to you. $500 and the convenience of a housekeeper who shares your bed. That's not. Isn't it? She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. You needed a wife to make your ranch respectable, to cook your meals and warm your bed. I needed security and a roof over my head. It's honest at least. That night, as Ezra lay listening to her careful breathing, he realized Miguel was right. Evangeline wasn't just guarded, she was terrified. But of what? Marriage? Or something else entirely? The answer came 3 days later when a stranger rode up to the ranch. Evangeline was hanging laundry when she saw him, and the wet sheet fell from her hands like a surrender flag. Evie, darling, the man called out, dismounting with theatrical flair. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? Ezra emerged from the barn to see Evangeline backing toward the house, her face white as bone. Hello, Charles, she whispered. The stranger was handsome in a slick, dangerous way, the kind of man who wore expensive clothes and cheaper morals. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Aren't you going to introduce me to your husband? Charles's eyes swept over Ezra dismissively. Though I must say, Evie, you've certainly lowered your standards. Ezra stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to his gun belt. I think you'd better state your business and move on, friend. Charles laughed. Oh, this is rich. The cowboy wants to protect his little bride. Tell me, does he know about Boston, Evie? About what really happened to your father? Evangeline's sharp intake of breath was like a knife to Ezra's chest. Whatever this man knew, it was the key to all her fears, all her walls. And Ezra had the sinking feeling that when the truth came out, it would destroy them both. Charles Whitmore settled into Ezra's kitchen like a snake coiling in sunshine, his presence poisoning the air. Evangeline stood frozen by the stove, her knuckles white as she gripped the coffee pot. Such a cozy little setup you have here, Charles mused, accepting the cup Ezra grudgingly offered. Though I must say, Evie, it's quite a step down from Beacon Hill. Get to the point, Whitmore, Ezra growled, his patience wearing thin as old rope. Charles's smile was razor-sharp. The point, my dear cowboy, is that your wife isn't quite the innocent victim she's pretended to be. He pulled out a leather portfolio, spreading papers across the table like a dealer laying out cards. You see, Evangeline's father didn't just gamble away the family fortune. He stole it first. Evangeline's cup shattered against the floor. That's not true. Oh, but it is, darling. $20,000 from the Merchants Bank of Boston. Your dear papa was quite the embezzler. Charles's voice dripped false sympathy. And when they caught him, well, let's just say he chose a coward's way out rather than face the consequences. Ezra watched Evangeline crumble, her proud shoulders sagging under the weight of shame. You're lying. Am I? Charles produced a newspaper clipping. Boston Herald, March 15, 1881. Bank official dies by own hand after theft discovered. Quite the scandal, really. The silence stretched like a hangman's noose. Ezra felt something cold settle in his chest as pieces began falling into place. Evangeline's fear of depending on anyone, her insistence that their marriage was just a transaction, her terror of being found out. But here's the truly delicious part, Charles continued, savoring each word like fine wine. The bank never recovered the money. And I have it on good authority that dear Evangeline knows exactly where it is. I don't know anything about stolen money, Evangeline whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Charles laughed. Come now, Evie. We both know your father was too sentimental to simply lose $20,000 at the poker table. He hid it somewhere, didn't he? Probably told you where before he put that gun to his head. Ezra's world tilted sideways. The woman he'd married, the woman he was falling in love with despite himself, was the daughter of a thief and possibly a thief herself. Even if what you're saying is true, Ezra said slowly, what's it to you? Charles's mask slipped, revealing something ugly underneath. Evangeline was supposed to marry me. Our engagement was announced in all the papers. Then her father's scandal broke and she disappeared like smoke, leaving me to face the social humiliation alone. So this is about revenge, Evangeline said, finding her voice. This is about justice. And money. Charles leaned back in his chair. I've spent considerable resources tracking you down, my dear. The least you can do is compensate me for my troubles. How much? Ezra asked quietly. $10,000. Half of what her father stole. Seems fair, don't you think? Evangeline laughed bitterly. I don't have $10,000. I don't have $10. But your husband does. Charles's eyes glittered with malice. I've done my research, Mr. Blackwood. Your ranch is quite prosperous. Surely your wife's honor is worth a small investment. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the mantel clock. Ezra stared at Evangeline, searching her face for answers, for truth, for anything that might salvage what was left of his trust. Is it true? He asked quietly. About your father? About the money? Evangeline met his eyes, and he saw his answer in the tears she refused to shed. Yes, he stole the money. And yes, he told me where he hid it before he died. The admission hit Ezra like a physical blow. Everything between them had been built on lies. But I never touched it, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I couldn't. It was blood money bought with my mother's life and my father's soul. Charles clapped slowly. How noble. But nobility doesn't pay debts, does it? Ezra stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You have until sunset to get off my land, Whitmore. And if I refuse? Ezra's hand moved to his gun. Then we'll settle this the way we settle things out here. Charles paled but held his ground. You can't protect her forever, Blackwood. The truth has a way of catching up with people. As Charles gathered his papers and headed for the door, he paused. Oh, and Evie? When this all falls apart, and it will, remember that I offered you a way out. After he left, Ezra and Evangeline stood in the wreckage of their fragile peace, the weight of secrets and lies crushing down between them like a collapsed mine shaft. Ezra, I don't. His voice was raw with betrayal. Just don't. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Ezra wondered if some wounds were too deep to heal, some truths too bitter to swallow. The storm broke at midnight, rain lashing the ranch house like bullets. Ezra sat on the porch, whiskey burning his throat, watching lightning split the sky. Inside, Evangeline moved around like a ghost, packing her few belongings with quiet efficiency. She told him everything after Charles left, how her father had confessed on his deathbed, how he'd hidden the money in a safety deposit box in Denver, how she'd carried the key and the guilt for over a year. She'd spoken in a flat, emotionless voice, like she was reading someone else's obituary. I'll leave in the morning, she'd said. I won't bring any more shame to your name. Now, as thunder rolled across the desert, Ezra found himself thinking about the woman who'd tended his garden with such care, who'd flinched every time he tried to show her kindness, who'd built walls around her heart to protect everyone else from the poison she thought she carried. Miguel appeared in the doorway, shaking rain from his hat. Patron, there are riders coming. Many of them. Ezra squinted through the storm and saw them, at least 6 men on horseback, moving fast despite the weather. His blood turned to ice when he recognized Charles Whitmore leading them. Evangeline, he shouted, bursting through the door. We've got trouble. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her traveling bag in hand. It's Charles, isn't it? Him and 5 others. They're not here to talk. Evangeline's face went pale, but her voice was steady. This is my fault. I'll go with them. Like hell you will. Ezra grabbed his rifle from above the mantel. Miguel, get Tommy and arm yourselves. We're about to have visitors. The riders thundered into the yard, their horses' hooves churning mud. Charles dismounted, flanked by men who looked like they'd crawled out of every saloon and jail from here to California. Blackwood, Charles called out. Send out my fiancée and nobody gets hurt. Ezra stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. She's not your fiancée. She's my wife. A marriage built on lies isn't a marriage at all. Charles's voice carried over the storm. Evangeline belongs with me. We have unfinished business. The only business you have here is leaving, Ezra replied. And you've got about 10 seconds to start. Charles laughed. You're outnumbered, cowboy. Be smart about this. Maybe. But I guarantee you won't live to enjoy your victory. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Evangeline appeared beside Ezra, and everything changed. Enough, she shouted into the storm. Charles, you want the money? Fine. I'll tell you where it is. Evangeline, no, Ezra said. She looked at him with eyes full of pain and love and terrible resolve. I won't let you die for my father's sins. The key is in my jewelry box, she called to Charles. Safety deposit box 247 at the First National Bank of Denver. Take it and leave us alone. Charles's smile was triumphant. See how easy that was. Now come down here and we'll. The shot came from the darkness beyond the yard, taking down one of Charles's men. Then another. Miguel and Tommy had circled around, using the storm as cover. Chaos erupted. Charles's men scattered, returning fire wildly. Ezra pushed Evangeline behind the porch railing and began picking off targets with methodical precision. You should have taken the deal, Blackwood, Charles screamed, firing blindly through the rain. Should have, could have, didn't, Ezra muttered, putting a bullet through Charles's shoulder. The fight was over in minutes. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Charles's men were dead, 2 had fled into the storm, and Charles himself lay bleeding in the mud, his expensive clothes ruined. Ezra walked over and stood above him, rifle pointed at his chest. You've got a choice, Whitmore. Ride out now and never come back, or I finish this permanently. Charles struggled to his feet, clutching his wounded shoulder. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Evangeline stepped forward, pulling a small key from around her neck. She threw it into the mud at Charles's feet. Take your blood money and choke on it. But if you ever come near my husband again, I'll kill you myself. Charles stared at her for a long moment, then picked up the key and stumbled toward his horse. You'll regret this, Evie. The only thing I regret, she said quietly, is ever believing I loved you. After Charles and his remaining man disappeared into the storm, Ezra and Evangeline stood in the rain, both of them shaking from adrenaline and emotion. Why? Ezra asked. Why give him the key? Evangeline smiled through her tears. Because some things are worth more than money. And because I finally found something worth fighting for. Ezra pulled her into his arms, not caring about the rain or the mud or the bodies in his yard. You bought a bride, not a heart, he said, echoing her words from their wedding day. I was wrong, she whispered against his chest. You can't buy a heart. But you can earn one. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, Ezra Blackwood held his wife and knew that some storms were worth weathering, some truths worth facing, and some loves worth fighting for. The past would always be part of them, but it no longer owned them. They were free to write their own story now, one honest word at a time.